Hi, everybody. Here we are, Sonali's book club in conversation with one of my favorites is Dr. Shefali. And Dr. Shefali is coming out with a new book. I've been a fan of hers because I really loved one of her books, which when I turned a mother, it was one of the books that I found was most relatable in all the parenting books that were around at that point of time. The book was called The Conscious Parent. And now there are so many concepts that come out of that book that we all talk about much more. But at that point of time, it was one of the first of its kind where when she was talking about conscious parenting. And Dr. Shefali has come out with a new book and it's called A Radical Awakening. Dr. Shefali, welcome to Sonali's book club. Thank you for joining us. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. My first question to you is parenting book to writing about feminine energy. What is this journey? What made you do this?
Well, a lot of it is inspired by my own life, of course, because I think that in order to write books that are self-help, you have to help the self first and be really inspired by your own life and speak from a place of experience. But I'm also a clinical psychologist, so I help so many women in particular. So when I did the parenting books, it was because, I was so shocked by the unconsciousness in my own parenting and the parenting around me that I had to write those books. But underneath it all, I began to see that women especially have a very urgent need to be heard, be seen, be validated that we don't get from our toxic patriarchy. Growing up in India, especially in India today, is while it's becoming more modern, it is still very repressive for the female divine psyche. So I have lived it, but I also see it here in the West, even though they're not Indian. So I really felt that now that my kid is grown up, she's 18, I've done with my contribution to parents, I've done that work. That felt very important at that time. But now I felt like we must talk about the woman and how she has been silenced and disconnected from her inner knowing because she raises the family and she is the connector. So, and I think women in their 40s, when their children grow up and they've checked off that box, we do go through a portal for transformation. Whether we walk all the way through or not is up to every woman, but there's an opportunity because our greatest identification is to be a mother. And once we fulfill that, we are then confronted with the who the F am I? Mm-hmm. And I went through that, at 44, my daughter was 14. And even though I had been living a more or less very awakened life, I was still holding on to the identification of mother. But when my daughter discarded me and didn't need me anymore, I went through this naked appraisal of who am I and went through a big transformation. I left my marriage. I went through a personal, huge epiphany. I had a radical awakening. And so I wrote about it. And I see many women in their 40s and 50s going through this. Where
I remember as a teenager, I remember what you said. I have seen my mother go through it. My mother has been a homemaker, and her whole life was always around us. And eventually, I went into that part where I would feel that, oh my God, can you just give me some space? And then I would feel guilty because I knew my mother was doing everything. She'd given up everything and her whole life was me. And suddenly it felt like I didn't understand that I was not being good to my mother, and that guilt would be there. And as I grew older, I realized that, you know what, it's not just me, but the fact remains that my mother doesn't have anything else. This is her life. And hence she is being clingy because there is nothing else. And I remember as I started working and as I grew older, identifying this and having this chat with my mother and telling her that you need to get a life, find something. But being a mother is considered so sacred and so amazing all over the world, but especially in India. And, for my mother, it was like, I'm a mother. What are you trying to tell me? Are you trying to tell me I shouldn't be a mother? I mean, it was something which was very radical for her. And I said, maybe I'm not right, and maybe I'm not saying something wrong. And then life went on. But I was reminded of that when I was reading your book. And I said, oh my God. And I remember saying that I need to have a life. I don't want to do what my mother has done. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I really love what she did. But that's exactly what you're saying. Finding yourself when your child grows up is very, very difficult.
Yes, yes. You hit the nail on the head, because in India, especially, motherhood is this sanctified pedestal.
Yeah,
But what happens to women is that they lose themselves in that role, and they use their children to feed their missing sense of self. But
right.
the truth is that the self can never be found in our children or in that role. And so many women in India don't challenge themselves to go beyond that horizon to find themselves. There is something greater than motherhood there, and that thing is themselves. But they have not dared to find, because the tradition has said that motherhood is the ultimate destination. So they never cross the threshold to really discover
But
something
Dr.
greater.
Shefali, I'm sorry to interrupt, but also it's not easy when you have been in a home for so long. Um, it's not easy. Home is a way of saying it, but when you've been in a role for so long, it's not easy to break out of it or to identify it, even that, yes, this is what is wrong with me. When you say you practice as a psychiatrist, how many women actually come to you identifying that fact and say, I need help?
Yeah, it's no, most of them don't. They just know that they're unhappy or frustrated or losing their purpose, or disempowered, lost, confused. They come with the feelings. The feelings bring people to therapy.
Ah,
And then I help them understand why they've been feeling that. But you're right. If you're conditioned, brainwashed, your whole foundation is that, you don't even know that that could be a problem. It's an
right,
epiphany. That is the radical awakening, to
right,
realize that you've been living in a fog. I call it living in a fog, identified to the role, needing validation, approval, and praise from others, and
mm-hmm.
not realizing that that's how you've been conditioned to be, begging for crumbs of love and worth from the audience, from the person, from the family. And that's how most of us are conditioned, especially in India. It's the outer focus. What will people say? I mean, we are brainwashed with what people will say. So our whole identity is to be contoured to that external. And it's not about getting a job on the outside that I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I'm talking about finding who you are, untethered from the approval, validation, and praise from others.
right, right. So this book, it's been getting rave reviews, and Alicia Keys read out the poem and literally did a book drop instead of a mic drop. It was amazing. That poem itself says so many things, and so what does it feel like? I mean, to what does it feel like that this is the time we've come to, be it the pandemic and everything, but there's so much more of the mental and spiritual awakening I feel that is coming about. Do you think it's because of this that more so it's a time for the women to kind of come out and find themselves? More so, this is the right time for radical awakening? Do you think this period that we are going through, is it going to help us move forward as women, as sisters, as you like to say in your book?
Yeah, well, every moment is a moment for that, but you're right. There's some moments that are like particular, and pain is a very opportune portal to have collectivity, collective wisdom, collective sorority. But there are many moments in history that we have come to and left and bypassed. So this is just one more moment. There will be many more, and this may be lost. I wrote the book because it was my moment, but I don't know whether it'll galvanize a movement, because it takes an awakening on many people's part for it to happen. Like the pandemic, that is a moment for us to reevaluate, for us to recourse, recorrect. How many of us have actually taken that? So
Right.
there are many moments in history when we give birth as women. That's a huge moment of spiritual growth, where we can enter the present moment, where we can let our ego go, but we do the opposite. So again, it's I offer, and spiritual teachers, wisdom teachers, movement shakers, we offer. And if it gets into, I never thought the conscious parent would ever take flight. So I wrote it, and then who knows whether it moves enough people, right? These are movements in the making. So who knows?
It is a fact that it's not the child that was born. It is a mother who's born, and it is our growth. And I think I had my son because I needed to grow at that point of time, and it kind of showed me a path where I could grow. Could you walk us through a bit through your relationship with your daughter? What is it like? How does this radical awakening come about, more so because your daughter turned into a woman in that sense, So what is that relationship like?
Well, what I will say is very different from what she will say. So just know that children and parents rarely have the same sentiments if they are individuals. If they're enmeshed, then they have the same. So
you brought her up to be an individual, let's say that. So now, How was this relationship?
Yes, it's fascinating because she's so an individual and doesn't get influenced by me. So I see my ego wanting to have control and influence, but I've so worked through those issues now. I mean, it's been 18 years. So for now, I just see her on her path, in her destiny, very little to do with me. And I want her to become even more individuated. So she finds herself without mom, without comparisons to mom, without anything to do with mom. So how the radical awakening shows up is as whole and complete as I feel, I can release her completely to her life, to her destiny, while being in the background when she needs me, but never needing her to be a particular way for me anymore.
That's a very, very difficult journey. You're making it sound very simple, doctor, but it's not so simple, to be, especially it's the conditioning in us is so much where we as women, girls, forget the fact that as a child, it's so difficult to let your child, it's a journey to let the child go, but especially the girl, to be, because there's this, as you said, you were born in India, whatever that upbringing that was, to be able to let go of that upbringing and be able to give her that kind of individuality, it's a huge, huge journey, and amazing that you've achieved that. And that's something that we all need to achieve and work towards. In your book, you mention inner work. What is this inner work that you're talking about?
Well, that's why I can barely do what I'm saying I'm doing, but it's because I do inner work. So what is inner work? Inner work is when we understand that our patterns from childhood are constantly showing up in the present moment. So the inner work is to understand that although I think I'm reacting to reality, I'm actually reacting to inner processes that are conditioned from childhood. So the work I need to do is on the inside to see how I'm projecting my internal onto the external and believing it.
Right.
It's not the external, it's my internal that is causing the external.
It's the like with the inner work, you also talk about the cultural matrix. So could you talk about it a little more for us? And what do you mean by the cultural matrix?
Well, we are growing up in a bubble, the cultural bubble, and we don't realize that this bubble is not the way things need to be. It's the way that it has been constructed to be. So especially in India, the bubble is iron, it's strong, the traditions, the belief systems, the indoctrinations, the how to be a girl, these are not truths, but we take them as truths because we don't understand that they come from a construction called the culture. Culture is a construction. It's actually a bubble that you can blow. But for us in India, it's an ironclad way of being,
right,
which is completely total. It's nothing. It's like this. You can just flick it off. But in India, there's no choice like that. It feels like the way it is. And the radical awakening is to realize, oh, I could have just done this and it would go away. But we don't ever think that because we're asleep in the matrix. We're completely
You
subjugated.
know better.
We're enslaved and we don't know we are. And it's so sad. We're enslaved by a bubble. And when you realize,
who would have thought that?
yes. And when you realize you could just do and you'd be free, that's all it takes.
And
But
then
we
it's like,
can't.
oh my God, I waited so long to do this.
Yes, this is
I
the
wish I had
sadness.
known this earlier. You
This
talk
is the
about
tragedy.
you talk about creating loving boundaries. What do you mean by that?
Well, now you script to like something way later in the book. So the matrix. First, we have to understand that we're living in a web of lies, and because the web of lies is so enmeshed in us, so enslaved within our being, our psyche, now we are responding in robotic ways. Because we're responding in robotic ways, we don't know who we are. Because we don't know who we are, we don't know what our boundaries are. So boundaries is very late in the book I talk about, because you have to go through this deconstruction, because you can only have real loving boundaries or boundaries at all when you know who you are. When you know, what are my limits? What do I like? Who am I? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? No, in India, while you're asleep, you don't know. You're just like following because your khandan told you, or your name, or your religious fears tell you what to do, right? So you look for the auspicious day, right? You can't have a loving boundary if you decide.
In India, you have a lot of boundaries, or even otherwise, as women, there are a lot of boundaries that are put up in any case. So a lot
they're
of
not
times
internal
where I
boundaries.
come from, boundaries sound like a bad thing. But when you say loving boundaries, it actually sounds like it's the good thing to do. And but because boundaries come with all sorts of negative connotations, where I'm going to be hemmed in, I'm going to be stopped from doing something, and these are the limits that are being put on me. So that is the reason why I want the members of our club to understand that it's boundaries, but it's loving boundaries that you're talking about. So, and that's why I want them to know, what do you mean by loving boundaries? Because it's something that you at once start negating and you start putting, I don't want boundaries. But what is it? What are loving boundaries?
So in India, there are many boundaries put on women, how to be, how they should be, what is expected of them. That robs us of our inner knowing. By loving boundaries, I mean when you are authentic to your inner knowing and aligned to your inner knowing, and that you don't actually succumb to the boundaries of the external world. So you lovingly say, no, thank you. And you are you're given freedom. You give yourself freedom to say, no, thank you, that doesn't work for me. But in India, that comes very late in life, because we don't believe we have the freedom to say no.
No, sometimes it never comes also.
And the best thing in India is we are told that it's virtuous to not have boundaries. Yeah. What a lovely girl. There are no boundaries. She's always giving. She's always compromising. She's always sacrificing.
Yeah.
That's how culture plays the woman in India, especially, where she's told she's virtuous. She's noble when she's just ready to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to make food. My grandmother used to wake up anytime to make us food.
Yeah.
And we thought she was the most loving mother and grandmother. Now I realize, poor thing, like we abused her.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know,
but we loved it.
Favorite chapters that I would say is the many faces of the ego in this thing, the many faces of the ego. I think amongst all the things that you've written, that for me personally was one of the best chapters that you.
What came up for you?
And I'll tell you why. Because you know what happens is when you read it is when you realize that all of us are there in it. And when you think that, no, it's not me, I have, been through certain things and then you read it and you realize that none of us are exempt from it. All of us are caught in this cultural matrix, as you call it. And all of us have, the many faces of the ego, in which what I would want to tell my members is that when you read that chapter, and I would like you to write in and tell us which were you, which one did you identify with? I'm identified with two, and I think I am part of two, not just one.
The giver and the controller?
Yeah.
Yeah, most of us are that. So So
Oh
in this
my.
chapter, I talk about how we've created personas in order to get validity and significance. So I talk about the givers, the controllers, and the takers.
The thing is that I was like, how does she know me so well? It was like, oh my God, this is like crazy. But yeah, that was like, really, it was an awakening. And I think this is a book that needs to be on our bookshelves and we need to go through it again and again, because I think in my first reading, there's a certain part of it that I've understood. But I think there's so much more that is there in layers that I really need to understand in this book. I love the way that you made it so clear as to how is it that it's women who are we start blaming men and we start talking about that, but it's so many times that women that are holding women back. And again, that's the cultural matrix that you're talking about, where we are all so indoctrinated in that sense to kind of not like a woman who is independent or who is better at something or is doing something independent, and we start pulling her down. And you've just identified it so well. It is so easy for us as women to start blaming the men, and we're not looking at what is it that we need to do. And I promise you, after this book, from the next time on, my life is going to be sisterhood. And that is a mantra that I'm going to take on. And I really hope a lot of other women do that. And that's the awakening that I think we as women need from this book. So thank you. It was beautiful. I want to ask you one more thing. The really beautiful thing I thought about this book was the fact that there was so much of understanding that you looked at the men. When you talk about the male and when you talk about how we need to, because they are also trapped in this in this cage, in that sense of perception. Could you kind of tell our viewers a little bit more about it? Because that is a point a lot of um, books about awakening of women don't talk about. And it was beautiful the way you put that out.
Yeah, I have great compassion for men in the patriarchy, even though they have more privilege, because they are trapped in the role of provider, protector, achiever, competitor. And they are always measuring up against other men in terms of their achievement. Manlyhood is wealth in India, is success in India. And that's so difficult because not everybody
is places all over the world in that sense. It really comes to that. And eventually, if you see, the whole aggression is that all over the world.
Exactly. And then also men are not given a pathway to express their feelings. Men are also not allowed to understand their sexuality. And because there's not enough awareness around sexuality in men, they act out, they are perverted, they are twisted about it because they themselves don't understand their own body. So men are being done a disservice too, and so are we. And we need to look at it as a system, as a whole, so we can understand how to make it better for our children. May have messed it up for ourselves, but for tomorrow, for the next generation. And the only way is to understand them. But they're not honest with us because we don't let them be honest, and we're not honest with them, and we're all just playing roles and hiding things from each other because we're trying to fake it. We're trying to make it. So
I think this is one thing that I would say to all the sisters watching this, that this is a book that you should be, it's a gift that has to be given to the men in our lives, whoever, fathers, brothers, husbands, boyfriends, friends, anybody, they need to be given, because I think the moment they understand that, I think it'll make them better partners also. So that is something that I thought was an amazing part in this book. You talk about body shaming, and there's a lot of talk about that where women are concerned, and the awakening of women is concerned. We talk about how body shaming is not good for our daughters, how body shaming for us is a certain thing. You talk about that also really, really nicely. It brought back my journey with cancer, my scar, my losing my hair, and accepting the fact that I don't have to be perfect. It was a tough journey, but I did reach there. I love the way you put that in the book. And again, another thing for which I would say, definitely a must read for everybody out there, because, just to understand and to accept what it is when you read about the whole thing. I'm not going to dwell too much on it because a lot of people have been talking about it. So for me, the takeaway more was to understand the men. What I would like to ask you is that what is next for you after this book? Where do you think this leads you to?
Yeah, I have lots of books coming. A book about men, a book about greater consciousness. My work is all about inner liberation. So work, all things to do with that, the conscious relationship. So many books coming after this. So yeah, maybe 6 on their way. So
we are looking forward to the books, but I would say parenting, finding yourself as a woman. Somewhere I have found that your books are also very, very autobiographical in that sense. So when you say 6 books, that means this journey is getting very interesting. And I envy you this journey, because it's not an easy journey. It sounds easy. It sounds very easy to talk about it, but it's not an easy journey. So 6 books means a lot, and I'm really looking forward to reading about that. Is there anything you would like to share about the upcoming books?
Well, no, not much, but I do want to let your audience know that I have a lot of courses. So I did a course on this book as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a big sale coming up next month. So if people want to explore deeper
Mm-hmm.
through courses, then the course makes the material come alive in a very different way. So I also have a coaching institute where I coach people to become coaches in my conscious parenting work online.
Okay.
And you can, if they're passionate about conscious parenting, they can become a coach with me. So people can go to my website, drshefali.com, and observe and watch and see what they would like to go deeper in,
Absolutely. drshefali.com.
Yes.
Yes, that's so interesting. And so these are the courses you conduct them on a regular basis, or?
So they were conducted live, but now they are sitting recorded. Now they're
nice.
on a platform. So I have a course on relationships, a course on manifestation, course on the awakened heart, how to enter your liberated self, a radical awakening course. I have courses with children, parenting, teens, parenting under 6. So I have a lot of courses that people can take.
Fantastic. So we can go and access the material at this point of time. And guys, you can also look for what are the courses that are coming up. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I would love to do some of these courses also. Dr. Shefali, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful conversation, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book. I'm really enjoying reading it. And like I said, this is a book that definitely needs to be read again and again, because there's always going to be another part of it that I'm going to be identifying with. So I'm looking forward to it. A Radical Awakening, guys, by Dr. Shefali. And please write it to me as to what you're identifying with the most. Thank you, Dr. Shefali.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.